In 2001, an email from Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor to Ghislaine Maxwell read, "Have you found me inappropriate friends?" A message he signed off as ALXXX. A decade later, another email to Epstein revealed Andrew's readiness to remain close, even after Epstein's conviction. These aren't vague accusations. They are digital fingerprints, time-stamped proof that undercuts his years of carefully worded public denials. While Andrew has tried to maintain a narrative of distance and ignorance, his own correspondence speaks louder, revealing a man fully aware and disturbingly engaged. These emails don't just confirm relationships he claimed to forget, they solidify a timeline of complicity. And in an era when truth is often buried under protocol, the release of this evidence has become an undeniable turning point.
If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update.
What Andrew wrote, and when, leaves little room for reinterpretation, only the growing question of why so little has been done about it. The story keeps getting darker, and the details are getting harder to dismiss. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has spent years insisting that the most damaging claims about him are exaggerations or outright lies. He has framed himself as a man misunderstood, a royal unfairly targeted by rumor. But the latest revelations don't come from tabloids or anonymous internet posts. They come from staff, from documents, and from evidence that paints a far more troubling picture. At the center of it all are Andrew's private gatherings, described publicly as nothing more than traditional shooting weekends. That explanation was meant to sound safe, familiar, almost boring. Country pursuits, guests in tweed, a polite dinner afterward. But according to multiple staff accounts, what was left behind after these weekends told a very different story. And once those details surfaced, Andrew's carefully maintained narrative started to collapse. The allegations are specific, uncomfortable, and difficult to explain away. Staff responsible for cleaning up after these gatherings reportedly found party bags left in guest bathrooms. These weren't gift bags with chocolates or toiletries.
If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update.
They allegedly contained drugs, lubricants, and exotic condoms. The discovery wasn't a one-off curiosity. It was serious enough that it stuck with staff and eventually made its way into detailed reporting. Andrew has never publicly addressed these claims directly. Instead, his silence has allowed them to hang in the air, unanswered. And when you place those staff accounts next to his past denials and interviews, the contradictions become impossible to ignore. Andrew's life hasn't slowed down despite the fallout. He continues to live comfortably, shielded by privilege, in surroundings that signal stability rather than consequence. While public anger grows, his day-to-day reality appears unchanged. That contrast is a big part of why these revelations land so hard. The allegations about the parties aren't framed as speculation. They are described as discoveries made by staff doing their jobs. Emails and photographs are said to support those accounts, reinforcing the idea that these weren't misunderstandings or exaggerations. The idea that these weekends were innocent shooting trips becomes harder to defend when you factor in what staff say they found afterward. What's striking is how these claims line up with a broader pattern. Over and over, Andrew's explanations have clashed with evidence that later emerges. Each new disclosure doesn't stand alone. It stacks on top of previous contradictions, creating a picture of someone whose private behavior doesn't match his public statements. And still, Andrew has chosen not to engage. No detailed rebuttal, no explanation, just silence, as scrutiny intensifies and patience wears thin. The situation escalated further with the release of newly declassified U.S. government documents connected to the Epstein case. These files didn't just reopen old wounds. They added fresh detail to relationships Andrew has long tried to minimize. The documents include emails and photographs that link Andrew directly to Jeffrey Epstein. This matters because Andrew has repeatedly claimed that his association with Epstein was limited and ended long before Epstein's crimes became widely known. The records challenge that version of events. One email from 2001 stands out. In it, Andrew signs off as ALXXX and asks Ghislaine Maxwell whether she has found him inappropriate friends. When questioned about his social circle, he responds that he is distraught. The tone is personal and familiar, not distant or formal. It suggests awareness and concern about the company he was keeping. Another email from 2011 shows Andrew acknowledging his ties to Epstein at a time when Epstein's reputation was already deeply tarnished. This directly contradicts Andrew's later public denials. The documents don't rely on interpretation or hearsay. They are written records, preserved and released through official channels. The photographs released alongside these documents add another layer of damage. They show Andrew with Ghislaine Maxwell, observing as he sits on the laps of multiple women. The images are explicit in what they suggest about the environment Andrew was comfortable in. Timing matters here. These images resurfaced during a period when Andrew was already under intense scrutiny. Even though he wasn't present at Christmas gatherings that year, the release of the photographs during the holiday period amplified public reaction. It reinforced the sense that this story refuses to stay buried. Andrew has previously tried to distance himself from Maxwell as well, portraying her as someone he barely knew. The visual evidence undermines that claim. These aren't passing encounters. They depict familiarity and ease, the kind that doesn't align with claims of minimal contact. Each photograph, each email, chips away at Andrew's credibility. And once credibility is gone, silence becomes less of a shield and more of an admission in the public eye. Andrew's denials regarding Virginia Giuffre have been among the most forceful. He has stated that he does not remember meeting her and has rejected her allegations outright. But those statements have never existed in a vacuum. Photographic evidence places Andrew with Giuffre, directly contradicting his claims. The now infamous image has become a symbol of the broader problem. Andrew says one thing, and documented evidence suggests another. The gap between those two positions is where public trust disappears. His 2019 BBC interview was supposed to draw a line under controversy. Instead, it raised more questions. Andrew expressed regret for his conduct but failed to address specific allegations in a convincing way. The interview didn't clarify. It exposed how unprepared he was to reconcile his story with the evidence. Since then, Andrew has retreated from public view, but the allegations haven't retreated with him. They've grown, fueled by documents and disclosures that continue to surface. Despite mounting evidence, Andrew has refused to cooperate with U.S. authorities. He has declined interviews and has not testified under oath. This refusal has become one of the most criticized aspects of his response. Under British law, there are limited mechanisms to compel his cooperation. That legal reality has allowed Andrew to remain silent without immediate consequence. But in the United States, the door remains open for further investigation. Officials have not ruled out renewed action as more material becomes public. The frustration is palpable. Critics argue that silence is not neutrality, it's a strategy, and that strategy has prolonged the story rather than ending it. Every unanswered question becomes another reason for suspicion. What's clear is that removing titles and military patronages hasn't satisfied public demand for accountability. These measures are seen as symbolic, not substantive, especially when Andrew's lifestyle appears untouched. The impact extends far beyond Andrew himself. Each new revelation reflects back onto the royal family as an institution. Public anger isn't limited to one individual. It's directed at a system that appears unable or unwilling to enforce real consequences. The monarchy's response has been cautious, restrained, and legally limited. That restraint may make sense constitutionally, but it hasn't played well publicly. Many see it as silence masquerading as dignity. There's a growing sense that the damage is cumulative. Each scandal erodes trust a little more. Each unanswered allegation feeds a perception that privilege protects its own. The question isn't just about Andrew and Namor. It's about what the royal family represents in a modern context and how it responds when one of its own becomes a persistent liability. Queen Elizabeth spent decades carefully preserving the stability and reputation of the monarchy. In her final years, she took steps to distance the institution from Andrew, withdrawing privileges and allowing titles to be removed. But even those actions now feel insufficient to many observers. Her legacy looms over this entire situation. The contrast between her commitment to duty and the chaos surrounding her son is stark. It raises uncomfortable questions about how much damage the institution can absorb before public confidence breaks. As new evidence continues to emerge, the story shows no sign of ending quietly. Andrew's future, legally and within the royal framework, remains uncertain. What is certain is that silence, once a protective tactic, is no longer working. If you've been following this story, share your thoughts. Do these revelations change how you see the royal family's response? If you want to stay updated as this continues to unfold, make sure to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more coverage. It's no longer just about reputational damage. At this point, the story surrounding Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has evolved into a case study in denial, deflection, and the limits of accountability inside royal walls. And the reality is, we've seen more evidence than excuses, and that ratio keeps growing. The party bag revelations were shocking on their own, but when stacked beside years of public denials, awkward interviews, and now declassified evidence, they speak to something bigger. Not just indiscretion, but a pattern, one that calls into question the version of events Andrew has insisted on for over a decade. These aren't whispers from distant sources. The information is coming from the people who were there, staffers who had to clean up after those weekends, who found the bags, and who saw firsthand what was going on behind the locked doors of supposedly respectable royal retreats. And yet, not a single clear statement from Andrew has addressed the most explosive parts of the allegations. The gap between the silence and the seriousness of the claims is widening fast. What's even harder to ignore now is how long Andrew's connections to Jeffrey Epstein were allowed to continue, both in private and in public. The documents released in the United States don't just highlight a one-time encounter or an ill-advised friendship. They illustrate a long-running, interconnected relationship that doesn't square with Andrew's previous public narrative. Emails show communication, photographs show proximity, and staff reports show behavior that contradicts every sanitized version of his weekend visits to places like Sandringham. These aren't the markings of coincidence. They are threads in a story that keeps unraveling. At this point, it's hard to see how anyone could argue that Andrew simply didn't know who he was associating with. The infamous 2001 email, "Have you found me inappropriate friends?" wasn't just a throwaway line. It was a red flag, waving loudly, in writing. There's a public record now, and that record shows someone who wasn't caught off guard by Epstein's world, but rather someone who stepped into it willingly. There's a reason why Andrew's ties to Epstein keep coming back into focus. Every time a new piece of evidence surfaces, it's circled back to the same names, the same events, and the same troubling overlaps. The lap-sitting photographs, the familiar correspondence, the long visits, all of it puts Andrew in the room, figuratively and literally. Epstein didn't operate in secret. He flaunted his influence. The people who surrounded him weren't oblivious. They were participating. And when someone like Andrew tries to distance themselves from that world now, the photographic trail says otherwise. The idea that these were just unfortunate associations doesn't hold up when the associations stretch across years, continents, and private jets. And it definitely doesn't hold up when you're shown smiling, seated, surrounded by it all. Those images, some of which now live permanently in the public consciousness, are a devastating contrast to every effort Andrew has made to clean up his public image. They tell a story even silence can't outlast. Of all the contradictions Andrew has made, perhaps none are more scrutinized than his denials regarding Virginia Giuffre. His claim that he has no memory of ever meeting her has always been undermined by that now infamous photo, Andrew, arm around her waist, Maxwell in the background. And yet he continues to insist that he simply doesn't remember. For most people, it's not a believable position. How do you forget a moment that's been immortalized in a photograph, especially when that moment is at the heart of such serious allegations? Then there's the matter of tone. When asked about Giuffre in his 2019 BBC interview, Andrew responded in a way that was mechanical and disconnected. There was no acknowledgement of the image's impact, no clear explanation of the contradiction, just a refusal to admit that anything meaningful had taken place. That lack of engagement, combined with the hard evidence, has only deepened the sense that Andrew is choosing denial over resolution. And as more records come to light, that denial looks less like confusion and more like strategy. The royal family's approach throughout this saga has been mostly to step back and let the story burn itself out. Titles have been stripped, appearances cancelled, and public roles removed. But has anything actually changed? The problem isn't just about optics. It's about what those optics reveal. A family known for its carefully curated image is now facing a scandal it can't spin. Andrew's behavior, his silence, and the mounting evidence don't just reflect on him. They reflect on the entire institution that allowed it to go unchecked for so long. Supporters of the monarchy argue that the system acted decisively by removing Andrew's royal duties. But those measures have always felt reactive, not proactive, and they haven't stopped the flow of revelations. Each new document, each resurfaced photo, puts the monarchy back in the spotlight, not for tradition, but for avoidance. And public sentiment is shifting. There's a growing chorus asking not just what Andrew did, but what the royal family knew and when. Meanwhile, Andrew continues to live at Royal Lodge, a sprawling estate on Windsor grounds. Despite everything, despite the interviews, the lawsuits, and the evidence, his lifestyle hasn't really changed. No public role? Sure, but no public consequence either. The image of him quietly enjoying life while his name is linked to some of the most explosive allegations in royal history has only added fuel to public outrage. People are questioning why someone under this level of scrutiny still gets to enjoy the trappings of royalty. The luxury, the protection, the silence. None of it feels like accountability. It's not about punishing someone just for being linked to a scandal. It's about how long the scandal can stretch out while the consequences remain purely symbolic. And the Royal Lodge, for many, is a visual symbol of that imbalance. Ghislaine Maxwell has been central to the story from the beginning. Her conviction and the public exposure of her role in Epstein's network shifted the narrative forever. And yet, Andrew has tried to distance himself from her as well. But the photographs, multiple, casual, and personal, make it clear that she was more than just an acquaintance. The image of her inside royal residences, including Buckingham Palace, speaks volumes. It's not speculation. It's proof. These aren't grainy, vague snapshots either. They are clean, high quality, and damning. They show Andrew and Maxwell with the ease of old friends. The kind of relationship that doesn't fit with the story of minimal contact Andrew has tried to sell. As Maxwell's trial unfolded, Andrew's name kept resurfacing. And while she now sits in prison, her legacy continues to haunt his, because the proximity to her, in every way, has become something he can't shake. Queen Elizabeth spent her life navigating scandals, but none like this. In the twilight of her reign, she took decisive steps, removing Andrew's public roles, stripping him of titles, and quietly pushing him to background. But the weight of what is done hasn't faded with those gestures. In many ways, her passing marked a turning point. Without her presence, the scrutiny on the rest of the family intensified. The sense of restraint and order she represented is gone, and what remains is a family grappling with its own shadows. Her legacy, carefully built over 70 years, now competes with the fallout from Andrew's actions. Critics argue that more should have been done sooner. Supporters say she did what she could within constitutional limits. Either way, her son's actions have created a challenge her successors now have to face without her. By now, the phrase "no comment" has become Andrew's signature move. But there's a limit to how long silence can buy you time. Especially when the documents keep coming, the evidence keeps mounting, and the public keeps asking the same question: why hasn't anything more concrete been done? The U.S. Justice Department hasn't ruled out reopening parts of the Epstein investigation. And while no formal charges have been filed against Andrew, his name sits in the documents like a stain that won't wash out. Every line of text, every image released, adds another layer to a narrative that already feels past the point of repair. This isn't just about gossip or reputation anymore. There are real questions about whether justice can ever apply to someone so insulated by status. When the average person faces this level of evidence and allegation, they face questioning. They face courts. Andrew, on the other hand, faces a quiet walk through Windsor grounds. And the longer he resists accountability, the more the public starts to feel like there's a two-tiered system of justice, one for everyone else and one for the royals. It's impossible to talk about Andrew's fall from grace without recognizing how deeply the Epstein connection poisons everything. This wasn't a one-time party or a coincidental photo op. The timeline stretches for years, with repeated encounters, frequent visits, and personal correspondence. Even as others in Epstein's orbit have faced trials, jail time, and financial ruin, Andrew has managed to hold on to a quiet version of royalty. The kind that no longer steps onto balconies but still sleeps behind locked gates. What's worse is that Epstein's world was never subtle. His crimes were documented, reported, and, eventually, prosecuted. And Andrew still stayed close. That's what people can't forget. Not just the association, but the stubborn refusal to cut ties even when the red flags were flashing in bold. You can delete social media posts. You can walk back statements. But photographs, flight logs, emails, those stick around. And with every newly declassified detail, the space between Andrew and Epstein keeps shrinking. The monarchy has always tried to weather storms by staying silent and carrying on. But this isn't a brief tabloid frenzy. It's a long, slow drip of scandal that refuses to fade. And it's starting to test the very strategy the royals have relied on for decades. Say nothing, wait it out, preserve the institution. But how do you preserve something when public trust is dissolving? When headlines about your own son include drugs, sex trafficking, and decades of denial? It's no longer about public duty or pomp and ceremony. It's about credibility. And right now, the family that stands for tradition is facing a future where tradition might not be enough. Andrew may be the headline, but the monarchy is the backdrop. And each time a new document drops or a new photo circulates, people ask not just what Andrew did, but what the rest of the royal family did to stop him. If the answer is nothing, then the problem goes deeper than just one man. There's no doubt that Queen Elizabeth took steps to limit the damage. She removed Andrew from public roles. She made it clear that his titles were no longer defensible. And in doing so, she protected the monarchy in the only way she knew how, quietly, firmly, without public spectacle. But even those moves feel like they came too late. For years, Andrew enjoyed the full privileges of royal life while the world asked questions that never got answered. And now, with the Queen gone, there's no calming presence to soften the fallout. Her legacy, built on stability and service, is being tested in the harshest way. And the institution she spent her life protecting is under more pressure than ever, not because of external threats, but because of failures within. Andrew's silence may shield him temporarily, but the damage isn't limited to him. It stretches into the very foundation of the royal brand. And the question left hanging in the air is simple. How much longer can this go on before something breaks? If you've been following this whole situation and you've got thoughts, drop them in the comments. We want to hear from you. Tap the like button if you think the scandal deserves more accountability, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. Because something tells us this story isn't done.